So today is an important day because we'll be wrapping up the last lecture on the conformity topic, and then we'll do the review for the exam. So it's a big opportunity for you to get more or less the answers for the exam. But in order for us to get to that part of the class, you'll need to be quiet, and you'll have to pay attention. We'll have to get through this conformity lecture as quickly as possible. The more time we spend futzing around, then I said futz. The more time we spend futzing around, the less time we'll have for the review. Along the same lines, a lot of people ask me questions before class, and I feel like sometimes I'm kind of rude to you because I'm like trying to set everything up. I really can't take individual questions before class. At the break or after class, I'll accommodate as many questions as I can. Nora can accommodate questions, but before class, I really can't. And don't take it the wrong way if I'm like, oh my God, I'm busy. I can't talk to you right now. Okay, and then also we'll pass out this study sheet at the break once we finish this short lecture on bystander non-intervention, and you'll have to ask any questions that you have, clarifying questions about the study sheet at that time. We do not take emailed questions about the study sheet. The study sheet is our, we're very generous giving you all this material, essentially all the material that the exam will cover ahead of time so that you can prep and study and know exactly what's on it because we want you to be able to ace this test. But we can't do, if we allow any email questions, then we have to answer all of them. And literally, we get hundreds of them. I mean, every exam last year, I would get 100. And I would make the mistake of like replying to the first one, thinking, oh, it's just this one small question. And then like 50 more would happen that Sunday. And I'd be like, oh, I answered the first one, so now I have to answer all of them. So we now have a rule. We can't answer any of them. So if you have a question, you'll have to ask it in class. And if we don't cover all of them, it's too bad. But the class is, it is, I'm sorry. But it's an imperfect world, and we're giving you a lot more. We're giving you a leg up relative to most classes, I think. And I think you'll agree when you get the study sheet, which was posted last night on BSpace as well. Okay, any organizational type questions, or should we get on to the last conformity lecture? Yes, ma'am. Oh, blue books. No, you don't need to bring in any blue books. Yeah, the exam will have all the space you'll need to write your answers. It's funny, the first time I taught this class, somebody asked that question. I was like, I'd been here for like 3 weeks or something. And somebody was like, should we bring in the blue books? And I was like, oh, yeah, bring in the blue books, definitely. And I just had no idea what I was talking about. And then somebody was like, do you know what blue books are? And I was like, no, I don't. So now I figured this out. You don't need blue books. I now know what they are. Yes. Yes, sir. Oh, if you want to get your papers back today, I believe we'll have them back for you at the end of class. Nora's going to retrieve them now. Is Nora, you confirm this? Yes. Outside at the end of class. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful California day, is it not? This is unbelievable. It's wonderful. Okay, so conformity 4, bystander non-intervention. To recap, we started the conformity section of the class, but can you all be quiet? Why can't the two of you please be quiet? Thank you. Oh my God, I'm asking you to be quiet. You're not being quiet. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So, all right. So, we started the conformity part of the class by talking about the Ash and Sharif experiments. And the Ash and Sharif experiments were early seminal pieces where psychologists got interested in interpersonal interaction. And what they do when they went to go talk about and explain interpersonal interaction, they went straight for one of the main things we think we know about social interaction, conformity, that conformity happens. And they demonstrated the extremes of two different kinds of conformity, conformity based on informational and normative influence. And then since that time, we've looked at specialized topics in conformity research from social psychology. We looked at groupthink, breaching, unpopular norms / pluralistic ignorance / the Emperor's Dilemma, a concept that has way too many names. I've contributed to that. And then today, we'll talk about bystander non-intervention, another topic in research on conformity. And who's heard of the Kitty Genovese incident already? Who's already heard of this? Okay, well, we'll recap this incident. It's a very sobering and depressing story about a woman, Kitty Genovese, who was murdered. And it's sort of the launching point for research on bystander non-intervention, because it's this kind of seminal case where bystanders did not intervene in an emergency. So the Kitty Genovese incident goes something like this. So Miss Catherine, a.k.a. Kitty Genovese, was a bartender. And I believe that she was a bartender in Greenwich Village, and she was returning home at 3 a.m. to Queens in New York City, the borough of New York City. at 3 a.m. She's a bartender. One of the things I think is really sad about this story is Kitty Genovese's maybe the kind of person we would have like hung out with, you know? She was like this cool woman who works as a bartender. She was like 25 or something. She lived in the city, you know? I don't know. She just seems like somebody you would know, you know? And on her way home, she was grabbed on her way from her car to her apartment, and lights went on in a nearby 10-floor apartment building. They have these huge apartment buildings all through every borough of New York City. And Miss Genovese began screaming that she had been stabbed. She had probably just been stabbed. And windows opened in the apartment building. People heard her, and one man shouted out, "Let that girl alone," and the attacker left. So this guy attacks Kitty Genovese, stabs her. She screams out. Multiple people in this apartment building, turn on their lights, open their windows, and one person does say something. But nobody calls the cops. Nobody calls the paramedics. Nobody does anything besides this one guy who said, "Let that girl alone," and the attacker left. But then, since nothing happened, the attacker returned and again started stabbing Kitty Genovese. And Genovese starts screaming, "I'm dying, I'm dying." And people hear this. That's how we know that that's what she screamed. So again, the lights come on, windows open in this giant apartment building, and people are again witnessing what's going on. And the attacker leaves again, probably noticing that all these windows are open and all these lights are on in this giant apartment building. These people can see her, or see him. The attacker leaves, gets into his car, and drives away. And Miss Genovese is suffering from multiple stab wounds at this point, staggers to her feet. A city bus drives by, doesn't stop, probably has people on it. And she doesn't get very far before the attacker returns again, finding that Genovese has collapsed in the doorway of a building nearby. And the attacker returns, stabs her a third time, this time fatally, killing Kitty Genovese. And finally, someone from this apartment building calls the police, and at this point it's 3:50 a.m., 50 minutes have passed since the incident began, in 3 different sessions, 3 different times where people open their windows, turn on their lights, and as soon as the call goes in, the police arrive in 2 minutes, because it's, 3 a.m., and that's what they're there to do at 3 a.m. So by the time they get there, Kitty Genovese has died, and they interviewed the man who did call, and they said, what made you call? Why did you wait 50 minutes to call? And he said that he had phoned only after much thought, and after he'd actually called a friend of his to see if he should call at all. And he said, until then, I just didn't want to get involved. It didn't seem like my place to get involved. And remember that this is the person who did the most of all the people in this apartment building that turned on their lights and looked out the window. The one guy who actually did something waited 50 minutes, called a friend first, said he didn't want to get involved, and called, a good 45 minutes too late. 37 other witnesses in the apartment building didn't do anything except open their windows, turn on their lights, and witness it. And so the big question is, why? And when this happened, there was Time magazine reports, New York Times articles, these things, these kind of crimes that catch the popular consciousness, like the John Benet Ramsey killing or what have you. This was one of those. This was one of those for the 1960s. People were like, what the hell happened here? It's not necessarily, it's shocking that a stalker would stab a woman to death, so horrendously on the streets of New York City. But what's maybe more horrendous is that nobody did anything, and so many people had an opportunity to. So social psychologists were like, well, what's going on here? Why wouldn't somebody intervene? Why wouldn't you intervene in that situation? And the obvious explanations, the explanations that Time magazine and the New York Times and all the media outlets went to directly were people don't have empathy, or they don't have concern. People don't care. And this was taken as an example of how people in New York City or in cities in general are different from us. Or maybe we live in cities maybe. So people that live in cities are callous, unfeeling people who are shut off to the rest of the world. They don't connect with others. And cities lead to the degradation of social order, the undermining of social bonds, the lack of empathy and altruism and helping, and the spirit of community. And this was seen by some as this horrible insight on the crimes of the city, and also just maybe the general lack of empathy in human nature. And then other people said, well, no, it's probably fear of retribution, that in general people don't intervene in these emergencies because they're worried, that stabber, the guy who's stabbing this woman might turn on me next, or, might know who called, and certainly that's one of the reasons that people don't intervene. But these really weren't the case with the Genovese incident, I don't think, at least. The fear of retribution doesn't really apply. You know, you're just one of several people who's turned on your light and opened your window. You know, how's the attacker going to, you know, visit retribution upon you? It doesn't make sense. Lack of empathy or concern. When they interviewed these people afterwards, a lot of people said that they really felt empathy and concern for Kitty Genovese. That actually watching her be stabbed to death was, you know, they felt terrible about it, and they felt like, oh my God, this is this terrible thing that's happening. And in general, we don't think from other research that people in cities are fundamentally different than other people. There's nothing about, you know, people who move to the city, they become, you know, ruthless, cruel people. So these two scholars, Latine and Darley, offered a different explanation. They saw this incident as a textbook example of a phenomenon they'd kind of had in their heads that they called the diffusion of responsibility. Now, what is this idea of the diffusion of responsibility? It's basically the following principle, that as group size increases, as the number of people in a group increases, each individual person's feeling of responsibility for anything that happens around them decreases, as well as their expectation of blame if they don't do something. So as group size increases, the odds of any given person intervening decreases. Does this make sense? So you would imagine if you're seeing some kind of emergency and you're the only person that sees it, you'll feel a great deal of responsibility, right? And you'll be very likely to intervene. Or you'll be maximally likely to intervene under those circumstances. But if there's 10 of you, you'll feel, according to Latine and Darley, you'll feel 1/10 of that responsibility. Or maybe it isn't even linear. Maybe it even goes down to 0 at some point, or nearly 0. Yes, ma'am. Is this the same as thinking somebody else will take care of it? It's a very similar idea, yeah, that as the number of people increases, you're like, well, yeah, okay, so on the one hand you think odds are somebody will intervene. It doesn't need to be me that does it. But I don't think it's just like that laziness or something that you know, you say, oh, well, somebody will do it. I don't have to do it. I think it's also your individual feeling that you're responsible for intervening goes down. And I think it's subtly different. Very similar, but subtly different. Yes, ma'am. Right. This is very similar to what we think of, or if I take your comment correctly, this is very similar to what we talk about when we talk about a mob mentality. That when people get together in a mob, that the mob is capable of extreme acts, perhaps rioting and looting, or terrible behaviors towards people that they wouldn't be capable of as individuals. That people get together and they feel lost in the crowd. Their responsibility is diffused, and they're capable of behaviors that they wouldn't be capable of alone. So there's another explanation that Latine and Darley advance for why people might not intervene in an emergency situation. And that is the following, that bystander intervention could maybe be thought of as conformity to an unpopular norm. Now, what are we talking about here? Basically, a pluralistic ignorance situation. So what's pluralistic ignorance? It's when, in a bystander intervention situation, it'd be where you're looking around trying to figure out if it's an emergency, and you look around and you see people and you're inferring that they don't think it's an emergency, even though you privately do. But everybody's thinking the same thing. So let's explain a little bit differently. People think that they ought to intervene in an emergency, but they don't because no one else is. So think about what happens with an emergency. You know, say some emergency happens, you know, right here and now, and we're all looking at it. For like a second, what do? We try to say, oh, is this a joke? Is this unusual? Is this weird? Is this really an emergency? I don't know. I don't want to behave differently or break the social order. I'm not going to do anything unless I get evidence from everybody else that it's an emergency. But what happens when we look around at each other trying to see, is this an emergency happening in front of us? We see a whole bunch of other people looking at each other trying to figure out, is this an emergency in front of us, right? And you can imagine situations you've been in like this, where maybe somebody collapses on the street, or there's an accident, or a pedestrian gets hit. I've been in a situation like that where a pedestrian gets hit, and everybody's standing around kind of looking at each other. No one's going to help the pedestrian. They're all just sort of like, did this just happen? Is this an emergency? I don't know. And what do you see? You see other people looking around. You wrongly infer that it's not an emergency because you see a bunch of people not intervening, right? And so that moment of search where you try to assess the situation can lead to an inaccurate inference that no one thinks it's an emergency, even though everyone privately is like, oh shit, this person just got hit by a car. Yes, ma'am. Right. That's what the lecture is about. That's exactly what the lecture is about. Yeah. So yes. So to repeat your comment for the microphone, this is why in CPR training, why they tell people to point at people and say, you're responsible for this emergency. You need to do something. And why do people do that? One, to undermine the unpopular norm thing, right, where everybody's looking around trying to see if it's an emergency, inaccurately infers it's not. And if you can do that, then you're essentially standing up and saying it is an emergency. But also it undermines the diffusion of responsibility. It breaks the spell of the diffusion of responsibility by indicating to at least one person you're responsible for this. Yes? Right. No, exactly. That's, okay, so I'm going to, yeah, I guess I don't note that here. I meant to note that. So yes, so in the Kitty Genovese incident, which mechanism would apply of these two mechanisms? They're subtly different. Remember, there's the diffusion of responsibility, and you can't answer because you obviously know the answer. So the diffusion of responsibility and then the pluralistic ignorance, unpopular norms one. Which one would apply? Probably the diffusion of responsibility one. Because the diffusion of responsibility, you know there's like a whole bunch of other people in this apartment building, and so you know that you're not the only person witnessing this, so you get this diffusion of responsibility feeling. However, you can't do, it probably wouldn't be the pluralistic ignorance one so much, because you can't look sideways, right? You're all looking out of your apartments, and you can't see that no one else is intervening. I mean, you can infer it after a few minutes, but presumably after a few minutes, you've already made the decision not to intervene for the time being. Yes, sir? Oh, really? Oh, okay. Maybe it could be both mechanisms. How would they see each other through their windows? Oh, opposing. Okay, yeah. Well, then maybe both mechanisms were at work. Maybe they could see other people who were seeing this and not intervening because there were apartment buildings across the street. Yes, ma'am. And then we're gonna have to continue. Oh, well, one person shouted, and then the stalker or the stabber left. But then he realized no one had called the cops, so he could just come back and continue stabbing her. Okay, yes. I don't know, actually. I don't know. I don't think so, but I'm not sure. Yes, sir. Yes, and we're about to get to, thank you. So that will be our transition to the research on this subject. It's an excellent question. Were there studies where they tried to analyze these reasons and see if they actually make sense, or if there are even other reasons for why people don't intervene in emergency situations? And by the way, I should say one anecdote. Last year when I taught this topic, 2 lectures after this lecture, someone actually fainted at the front of class while turning in an assignment. And I'm happy to say something like 5 people pointed at me and were like, you intervene. And I was like, oh my God. And to be honest, I was being a little slow. Like I had my phone out, but I wasn't quite. And somebody faints and it's on the ground. You should call the paramedics. So it was good that they pointed at me. They kind of gave me that nudge. I was intoxicated by the diffusion of responsibility, and so that was good. That was good. And so that's one of the lessons that you should take from today. Is yes, you should intervene in a bystander non-intervention situation, or if not, point to somebody and say you're responsible. It sounds like a silly thing to do, but it's actually very, very effective. Okay, so following up on your comments, sir, an experimental test of this situation. So, this is a natural situation. The Kitty Genovese incident, we can advance many explanations of what happened, and we don't know which one is necessarily correct, as a couple of you have pointed out. And we have uncertainty about all the details of the crime. I don't even know if the guy was caught. That's something I could probably look up. So Latney and Darley went to go design the following study in 1968. They put participants in cubicles in a study environment, and they asked them to have a group discussion over a microphone system about personal problems they were having with adjusting to college. And they were told that the study was about personal problems people have while they adjust to college. And one participant, who was actually not even a Confederate, it was a taped message, it was a tape recorder, and they would play the tape through the microphone, was making his statement about his problems adjusting to college when he began to have an epileptic seizure. And the dependent variable in the study was how long until the participants in the study came out of their cubicles to help this guy in his cubicle who's having a seizure. So what's the independent variable in the study, the experimental manipulation? Can you all stop talking, two of you? Thanks. Unless you're telling me the answer to the question. Experimental manipulation is, yes? It's actually, no, that's the dependent variable. The experimental manipulation is whether they play the epileptic seizure or, oh, no. Sorry. Oh, I totally tricked you. The manipulation is group size. Sorry. Okay. Not on the ball. Paying too much attention to all of you talking. Okay. So the manipulation is group size. There are either 2 participants, 3 participants, or 6 participants in the study. Remember, 1 is always a confederate. So basically, if you're a subject in this study and you're in this one, it's just you and the guy having the seizure. If you're in this condition, it's you, 1 other person, and the guy having the seizure. Here, it'd be you and 4 other people and the guy having the seizure. The guy having the seizure is not real and not really having a seizure. But I thought for a second the manipulation was whether they're having a seizure or not. It's not. They always have the seizure, and then they manipulate how many people are there. Okay, so here are the results. Remember, Latney and Darley are saying that in bigger groups, any individual person's feeling that they need to intervene goes down. Their responsibility is diffused across the number of group members. Man, so much talking. It's driving me batshit crazy. Okay, so, all right, so the group size of 2. What happens there? If it's just you and the guy having the seizure, 85% of participants help in this condition, though it kind of amazingly takes them 52 seconds to leave their cubicle and go help the guy. So that's not very good news on human nature normally. Okay. So, but what happens if it's you and just 1 other person? There's just 1 other person. You wouldn't think it'd be that different, right? You're still hearing a seizure. You go the same number of steps there. It's just there's 1 other person in a cubicle as well. Well, then the number of people intervene drops pretty far to 62%, and it takes almost twice as long for people to get out of their cubicle and go next door. Just the presence of 1 other person. It's kind of amazing, I think. And then here, what if there's 4 additional people that could also intervene in addition to you in helping this 6th person who's having a seizure? Intervention rates drop all the way down to 31%, and people take over 2 minutes, almost 3 minutes, to get out of their cubicle and help. I mean, that's 3 minutes of listening to somebody on a microphone having a seizure and not doing anything about it. Yes, sir. I don't understand the question. Can you repeat it? Sorry. Right. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Did they ever try to put multiple non-Confederates together and see what would happen? Here they basically did. To be clear, in this session, there's 2 live participants. You're not. I'm almost certain this is right. You're not just told that there's another person. Like there actually are 2 people, and they're gathering data on 2 people. Here, there really are 5 people who aren't the Confederate, and they're gathering data on all 5. I'm pretty sure that's the way they structured the study. But note that if you just put them in a room together and see what happens, it's a lack of experimental control, right? You'd like to ideally just have. I mean, I think the best test of the diffusion of responsibility is you walk into the lab. You walk into a cubicle. You hear a seizure, and the only thing that's different across the conditions is just how many people you think are also there. Nothing else is different. Everything else is perfectly experimentally controlled. And that's what they were trying to do. And they showed these huge effects for just that knowledge. Oh, there's 3 other people in this room, or there's 4 other people in this room, versus there's no one else in this room. It drops from that to that. A really tight demonstration of the phenomenon. Yes? Oh, like what if a Confederate actually intervenes? Well, that would. Yeah. No, yeah, I understand. I think I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, they were interested in how long until you intervene. So if you had a Confederate actually intervene, it would sort of end the study, I think. I don't think they were interested in what happens after somebody intervenes. But maybe you're misunderstanding you, but we should keep going for the sake of time. Yes, ma'am. Of the Latin and Darley 68 study. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Huh. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. Might the results be biased because they feel like they're in a protected, like, laboratory environment? Like maybe they feel some greater responsibility goes to the experimenters or something like that to intervene. Maybe. Although note that that's controlled across all three conditions, and they still get these big differences. Do you know what I mean? In all three of these conditions, if there's this feeling, I'm in a lab environment, the experimenters are really the ones responsible, then that should be equally evident in all these three, and maybe he is playing a role. I agree. Maybe that's part of why this isn't 100%. Maybe when it's just you and the other person. Maybe the reason this isn't 100% and this is 50 is because really, in a way, there is another person. It's the experimenter, and you're kind of like, where is the experimenter? Why are they not helping? But these differences across conditions are still meaningful and are still attributable to these other people being present. And so I don't know about this other study where the people are talking to one another. I think they did one where they don't talk to each other, but maybe you're right. I don't know. Okay. All right, so continuing on. Latney and Darley did a follow-up study in 1968. They had participants sitting in a waiting room, and they had smoke pumped in through a vent into the waiting room. You really can't do that study now. And they were curious how long before people would get up and leave the room to report a problem or even just to save themselves. And the manipulation was that participants were either alone in the room or they're with two non-intervening Confederates who are trained to just sit there and sort of whistle Dixie and fill out a survey or study or something like that. And they're interested in, how does the presence of these two people who are showing no concerns about there being any kind of emergency at all, how does that affect your likelihood of getting up and leaving the room because it's full of smoke and that's crazy? So what happens is when you're alone, you get up and leave and report it 75% of the time. I think they cut off the study before you would become injured by the smoke. So that's why it's not 100%. Presumably everyone would eventually leave the room if they could, if they were conscious, I guess. But then in the presence of two non-intervening Confederates, the difference is enormous. It drops to just 10% intervention before they cut off the study. By the way, wouldn't it suck to be a Confederate in that study, and go to work every day and sit in a room with smoke being pumped into it? That would be awful. Okay. Stanley Milgram. I keep talking about this guy because he's very creative and he did lots of very interesting studies, including the obedience to authority study, which we're concerned maybe has ethical problems. But in addition to that, he does all these other cool studies. One study he did is the lost letter study, or it's in the lost letter paradigm. And the lost letter paradigm is the following idea. You take a stamped, addressed envelope and drop it outside of mailboxes as though someone had tried to put it in the mailbox but screwed up, or got to the mailbox and accidentally dropped it, or what have you. That's me doing accidentally drop. And see, will somebody put it in the mailbox and then send it on to wherever it was going. And they address these to P.O. boxes, and then they can look at the rate of them that come back and say, oh, okay, so these got returned, these didn't. So they'll drop maybe. He did this for one to assess racism. And so he went down to the South and dropped a whole bunch of stamped envelopes to the NAACP, and then also some to the John Birch Society or some ultra-right segregationist organization, and tried to see, will people return the letters? Will they try to help the John Birch Society more than the NAACP? He tried to use this as a measure of political attitudes towards race in different parts of the country. It's a very creative idea. But one thing he studied with it was the diffusion of responsibility. He said, what if I go to really busy streets and drop a bunch of these addressed envelopes, these stamped envelopes, near mailboxes on these busy streets in these busy areas versus these not so busy areas. So maybe a rural setting or just a mailbox in a residential area that doesn't get much traffic. Which one's going to get sent in faster? Busy streets, more people see the envelope. Rural streets, fewer people do, or residential areas, fewer people do. So which one do you think gets it sent back faster or more at a higher rate? Exactly. The less traffic, the residential and rural type areas, they actually were more likely to pick up the envelope and put it in the mailbox, because when they would pass by, they'd say, oh, that's my responsibility. I'm the only person that sees this envelope. I'm going to pick it up and put it in. If they were in an urban, busy area for whatever reason, though Milgram said the diffusion of responsibility, they pass by the envelope and they say, oh, that's not really for me to do. There's 30 of us here looking at it. Okay. And then subsequent research has also studied bystander intervention and basically shows context matters a lot. Like in these settings, we've carefully controlled for characteristics of the emergency, whether there's an early mover who moves in and tries to do something, whether there's somebody who's trained in CPR who points and says, it's your responsibility. And so subsequent research shows context really matters. And basically those first attributions that people were making when they thought about the Kitty Genovese incident, the idea that New Yorkers lack empathy, that they're not good people, all of our research suggests that that's not the answer. Okay, so at this point you're probably wondering, does any of this matter? You're probably wondering that about the whole class at this point, and fair enough. So does any of this matter? So there was this incident that I think is very interesting that I think illustrates why these sort of lessons really do matter. So Tuesday, September 7th, 1993, at my old university, Cornell University, a nude 21-year-old male tried to jump into a gorge on the Cornell campus. Have you ever heard of this Ithaca is Gorgeous? You ever seen these T-shirts that say this? So Ithaca, New York, where Cornell University is, where I went to graduate school, is filled with these gorges all through campus, these big kind of rocky canyons all through town. They're very beautiful. There's waterfalls in them. But they also make ending your life incredibly easy. And research shows, I know, right? So, and if you live there for very long, you'll know somebody who either jumped into a gorge or knew somebody who jumped into a gorge. It's a pretty heavy thing. I knew two people who found people. No, I knew one person who lost somebody who was her boyfriend, and I knew somebody who found somebody. And Cornell does have a very high suicide rate, and it's not because it's a more depressing place. It's context. Context does it. It's easy to do it. So if you're having a bad day, you have a depressive day, it's very easy in Ithaca to end your life. And so this guy was probably having a depressive day, and he goes to jump into a gorge on the Cornell campus, but he was subdued by onlookers. And research shows, by the way, if you ever wonder, should I stop somebody who's trying to commit suicide? Is that a good thing to do? Because maybe they've made a decision to end their lives. And certainly that's the case in, I think, a lot of euthanasia situations, that people make a sort of rational, reasoned decision to end their life. But research shows that attempted suicides, while, yes, often people do try to do it again, that a lot of the time they don't. And so if you can stop somebody from committing suicide, that's generally a good idea if you can do so safely. Generally, people, maybe they're bipolar or manic depressive and they're having a bad spell and they wouldn't want to normally. So it's good news, I would argue, that this 21-year-old male was subdued by onlookers. And why was he subdued by onlookers? Well, this woman, Gretchen Goldfarb, had urged on two of her friends to intervene. Why did she urge on two of her friends to intervene? Because when she was actually said, she cited a recent lesson on bystander non-intervention from her social psychology class. So she came to a lecture much like this, and within a month was a hero, essentially. And it's funny, I went to go find out if Gretchen Goldfarb still exists, and I found her on Facebook, and I told her, I'm going to send her this PowerPoint presentation. I think she'd like it. I have given this lecture so many times, and I'm always like, oh, this Gretchen Goldfarb woman is almost not real anymore, but she's like a real person. She's out there. So, of course she is. I don't know why I thought she wouldn't be, but so the message: show up to class and pay attention. Obviously, this is the main message, right? Also, your nonconformity could be heroic. If you can break the spell of the diffusion of responsibility, either by yourself stepping out in a situation like that, or doing what you suggested, which is point to somebody and break the spell for them. Tell them you are responsible. If you can do one of those things, then your nonconformity could be heroic. And then also, well-behaved women rarely make history. Laurel Thatcher Ulrich. We'll take a couple questions and we'll take a break. Yes? That's a mean question. Okay, the question is, if she's so heroic, why didn't she herself intervene? I don't know. It's a big, 21-year-old naked guy, and I think she encouraged two of her male friends, according to the article, to intervene. And then also, I want to emphasize that there's two ways to be heroic in these situations. Yeah, you could be the person that stops the person from committing suicide or harming themselves, or who calls the cops or calls the paramedics, but it would be just as useful, or nearly as useful, to just tell somebody, you do something, you call the cops, you help that person. That's just as good, essentially, because you'll be breaking the spell for somebody else. Yeah. Other questions about this? Okay. All right, cool. So let's take like a 2-minute break. We'll pass out the study sheet, and then we'll do a review for the exam on Tuesday, which you all will kick ass on. Okay. So now, a couple organizational things. So remember, today in this room at 5 p.m. is the Cool Hand Luke showing. That's right, isn't it, Nora? I didn't say something wrong. 5 o'clock. Okay. This room, 5 p.m., Cool Hand Luke showing. If you can't make it, you still need to watch Cool Hand Luke. Even if you watched it before, it would be good to watch it with fresh eyes. And you can watch it streaming through Netflix. You can get your friends Netflix and watch it streaming through their Netflix. Whatever. Whatever. Yeah, watch it somehow. Go to a video store. There's still 2 remaining in California. Go to one of those and get it there. Yes, ma'am. I don't know how long it is. That's an excellent question. Does anybody know? About 2 hours. Yes. Yes. No. Okay. So the question was, okay. So 2 things. One, I was going to give you a little bit of a preface of like what to watch for while you're watching it, because I told you I would do that since I'm not showing you the assignment yet. I'll give you the assignment probably next Thursday, and you'll have the assignment then. But I don't want to show it to you yet because I want you to focus on the exam. But I do want you to know what to watch for. And basically, here's what to watch for as you watch Cool Hand Luke. Notebooks open, pregnant pause. What you want to watch for are themes and evidence for conformity and nonconformity, and obedience and disobedience to authority. Okay? Conformity and nonconformity, and obedience and disobedience to authority. Very simple, right? Pretty simple, and indeed it is simple. The essay might be a little bit more complicated, but what you want to watch for, what you might want to take some notes on, are like specific examples of characters in the film who are conforming or not conforming and why, obeying authority or not obeying authority and why. Okay? And then there was also a question of, will I discuss the film in class and will I distribute some kind of materials on that discussion? I'm not sure if I'm going to discuss the film in class. I'll probably just give you the assignment and answer clarifying questions. If I do discuss the film, it will be briefly in a lecture, and you can check it out through the webcast if you miss it. There were other questions. Yes, I answered the question. Okay, cool. Okay, any other questions about that? Cool Hand Luke, 5 p.m. here. Wonderful. Look for themes of conformity and obedience to authority, or nonconformity and disobedience to authority. So you by now all have the first exam, and as tradition would have it in this class, I will now answer any kind of clarifying questions that you might have about the exam. Please only ask the same question once. I know that's a ridiculous request, but last year people didn't just ask the same question like 3 times in these review sessions, but like this one dude asked the same question twice with somebody else having asked it in between. It was mind-blowing. I was like, oh my God, I know you just asked that question. And then people were like, okay, anyway, okay. So feel free to ask questions about the review sheet, and I'll be happy to answer them. The whole zeitgeist, the whole logic of testing in this class is you should know the material you're responsible for, so that then when you come in and take the test, there's no surprises, and you had every ability, every right to ace the class, or ace the exam, because that's what I want. I would love for everybody here to know every bit of information that I want them to, and then ace the exams, and you all get A's. To me, that would be successful. That would be great. Okay. So, questions? Yes. When I list all the readings, am I just saying, hey, by the way, these are all the readings from class, or am I suggesting that you'll be tested on them? Yes, I am suggesting you'll be tested on them. However, one of the reasons I do list it, it's a good question. One of the reasons I do list it is I move one of the readings we didn't quite cover in class, and that's on being sane in an insane place. So if you haven't read that yet, you might wait until after the exam to read it. If you have read it, great. You're way ahead of everybody else. You're making them look silly. You're leaving them in your dust. You're amazing. You're amazing. Your academic performance is freakish. So So anyway, so these are the readings you're responsible for. These will be tested. Note that they're under the matching/multiple choice questions category. These readings will be tested via multiple choice questions. Yeah, so you need to have read them. And my strategy here is read them carefully, and you should get the answers. You should be able to get the questions right. The questions, the multiple choice questions on the readings will be very similar in style and format to the quiz. The quiz, which was like in Aronson and Mills 1959, do they mean, is this about cognitive dissonance or is this about obedience to authority? And you're like, cognitive dissonance. Yeah. Stuff like that. Okay, more questions. Yes, ma'am. The guideline on the, so the question was, for the long answer, is that like 1 or 2 paragraphs or longer or whatever? There really isn't like a specific length I'm looking for on the long answer necessarily, kind of long enough to satisfy the requirements of the question. Like if you could bang out the answers to these questions in 2 paragraphs, that'd be great. I mean, I'd even maybe prefer that. It'd be easy on the readers. And I think in some ways for these, your strategy would be, answer the questions, maybe throw in a little bit extra detail if you have it in Flash so you really know the material, but, don't put in a ton of extra material. Don't write an especially long essay just to show, you can write a long essay. Because I think one thing you want to do is you want to help the people who evaluate your work. So you want to just lead the reader to the right answer and be like, this is where it is. Here's the right answer. I get full credit, yada, 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 hooray and go home. So I think that would be a good strategy. It's like just nail the answer, and then the reader can't miss it. But if you embed it in some 3-page opus, then the reader might be like, I didn't see this in there, and so just, yeah. Sometimes people have even like underlined parts of their essay where they're like, here, I'm totally saying the definition of that key term here, That's smart. Why not do that, right? Yes, ma'am. Heider's naive psychology comes from the cognitive biases attributions lecture, which I'm struggling to find because I didn't pop it up. Okay. This is the cognitive biases attributions lecture. Here is Heider's naive psychology, I think. There we go. And Heider's naive psychology is basically this idea that we're all sort of mini psychologists or lay psychologists trying to determine the causes of others' behaviors. That's basically the idea. Yeah. And so when we survey the world, we're constantly making dispositional and situational attributions in an effort to understand the causes of behavior in social interaction in our social milieu. I lost you, so I'm looking in just random places now. But sorry, I'm like, sorry. Yes, sir. Will the matching be like, oh, sorry, go ahead. Okay, will the matching be like there's a keyword and a definition and you match the two? That's exactly how it's going to be. Yeah, yeah. No, it'd probably be like a definitional thing. Like, can you identify this definition and discriminate it from others that aren't the right definition of that term? Yeah. It would either be in the matching or in the multiple choice. So it'd be like do you know the definition of this? It won't be, here's an example of somebody doing naive psychology. Can you identify that that is naive psychology? It wouldn't be that. Good question. Yes, ma'am. Will you have the whole time? You will. You will. And you won't need it. I can almost guarantee you. Because the exam is not in length substantially different from when it was 50 minutes. Different questions, but by the way, if you have one of the old exams, it will do you no good. For this exam is different, unique, and new. So you'll have to study. And you'll have to use this exam sheet to study. But yeah, but the length will be about the same. It'll be about a 50-minute exam. But technically, you'll have the whole hour and a half, or hour and 20 minutes when you take out the Berkeley time. Yes, ma'am. Do you have to know the dates for the experiments? No, you do, I will not ask you, when was Aronson and Mills? Was it 1959 or 1967? That's kind of pointless and detail-oriented. But you do want to be able to identify those experiments from minimal prompting, okay? So if I say, in Jones and Harris 1967, you should know that that's the Castro essay study. And these are the ones you need to know. So this isn't a huge burden, right? There's only 3 of these. So you would need to be able to know you need to know the difference between Fessinger and Carl Smith 59 and Jones and Harris 67, Ross et al. 77. Sometimes questions will make it clear. It'll be like, the quiz show study, and then I'll ask a question. But sometimes they'll just say Ross et al. 77. So you want to know what Ross et al. 77 is. And by the way, this is good practice because if you want to be like a smarty-pants social psychologist, which all of you need to be by the end of this class, then you'll want to be able to say, oh, in Ross et al. 1977, I think we all know that demonstrates the correspondence bias. And then in that way, no one will know what you're talking about. And you'll seem much, much smarter than them. Yes, ma'am. Sure. Ooh, where did that come up? Where did that come up? Cognitive biases. Can you be more specific? Very good. Attributions. Okay. And I think it's down at the bottom of this lecture. Oh, I just did that. That was the picture of the guy with focalism problems. Okay. All right. So focalism is a mechanism by which we explain the actor-observer bias. So the actor-observer bias is the tendency to see our own behavior as a product of situations and to see other people's behavior as a product of their dispositions or internal states. So that's the actor-observer bias. We tend to make dispositional attributions of other people's behaviors and situational attributions of our own. Why is this? Why do we think that this is the case? Well, there's a variety of reasons, but probably the most interesting one is focalism. And focalism is a mechanism that says we tend to overweight information that is focal in our view or in our attention, information that we focus on. We tend to overestimate its causal impact. So in this case, in focalism, you can imagine why it would be that you would think the situation causes your behavior because you're inside your head looking out, and what do you see? You see the situation, not yourself, and you tend to see other people's behavior is caused by their internal states because you look out and you see their behavior, and what do you see? Well, you see them, So it's very easy for you to make an attribution of their behavior to their personalities. But it's very hard for you to do that or it's harder for you to do it for yourself. Does this make sense? And focalism is a mechanism that doesn't just explain the actor-observer bias. It's a tendency we find across a lot of social psychological settings to attribute causes in situations that are focal to your attention. Oh, and by the way, people from collectivist societies, such as people from Asian societies, tend to do this less. Or people from Asian cultural backgrounds do this less. They take better account of context. No, I don't know exactly why. People are looking at me like, why is that? I don't know. But people from Asian cultural backgrounds are a little bit less susceptible to focalism-based biases. Yes? It may be because of Buddhism, that Buddhism teaches you to take better account of these sort of things, or it could be that the focalism came first, or the lack of focalism came first, and then Buddhism came about. Maybe. Because it's certainly the case in non-Buddhist Asian countries as well. But I don't want to go down that route. We'll talk about culture later in the semester. Yes. This is a mechanism that helps us understand why the actor-observer bias happens. The actor-observer bias is nothing more than the tendency to see our own behavior as a product of the situation and others' behavior as a product of their internal states. There's a bunch of reasons why that might be. And one mechanism we found in previous research can help explain it is focalism, that we tend to overestimate the causal impact of whatever we focus on, easier for us to see the situation for ourselves and the dispositions of others. But focalism is a mechanism that could explain other effects as well. Yes? How long should that, I just answered that question. Very clever. I'll do this one time. I'll double answer a question. How long should the long answers be? As long as it takes you to answer the question, and probably don't go very far beyond that. Like give a tight, strong answer to the question and then let it go. Don't do the 3-page opus. You remember when I was saying all that? Okay. Yes. Okay, excellent question. So the question is, what if you do a behavior that's awesome? Didn't I teach you? Didn't Professor Willard teach you that you tend to then take credit for that? In this section that I called the more nuanced model of attributions. Yes, Professor Wheeler did teach you that and is now saying, let's keep it simple for the purposes of the exam. So according to the more nuanced model of attributions, it is the case that the actor-observer bias is true, but it gets modified a little bit. So when you see somebody else do something, you make a dispositional attribution. Focalism is one reason why you might do that, because you see them and so you say, oh, they cause their behavior. When you do something, when you do something bad, you make a situational attribution because you see the situation and also you don't really want to take credit for bad things that happen that you do. When you do something good or successful, then you make a dispositional attribution, even though you're not in the focus of your attention because you're that motivated to take credit for awesome stuff that you could plausibly take credit for. So this is a sort of still more nuanced version of the actor-observer bias that takes account of motivated reasoning. But, and this, part of why I put this up here is because in the reality of social psychology, when you're a social psychologist, you do this kind of stuff all the time. You take multiple mechanisms, put them together, and get more layered and more nuanced understandings of behavior. And this is still incredibly simplifies actual behavior in the real world. You know, there's more mechanisms at work, more mechanisms, and even more nuanced predictions will be made. So this is more like an insight on the complexity of social psychology when you go to take all these principles and put them together. However, for the purposes of the test, I'll test you on motivated reasoning and the actor-observer bias in their simpler forms, not in this combined, more nuanced form. Excellent question. Yes, ma'am. How many questions will there be? I don't know. I haven't finished making the exam yet. So, you mean how many questions in? Okay, so how many questions? There will be a few IDs, a few, by which I mean 1 to 6. And there will be, no, I'm just kidding, probably 2 to 4. it's a little better. And then for the prompts or the long answer, there'll be 2. And then for matching, there'll probably be about 8 to 10-ish. And then for multiple choice, I don't know. Maybe as many as like 10 or so multiple choice. Maybe more, maybe like 12. Depends if I'm feeling randy. It's funny. It's funny. The 2 to 4 thing. Well, no. Okay. All right. We should stay focused on this. Okay. All right. Enough with the not so funny stories. Okay. Yes. Yes, sir. Is the fundamental attribution error the same as the actor-observer bias? You would be excused for thinking that because they are extraordinarily similar ideas. And also similar ideas to correspondence bias, but they're actually not exactly the same, and you need to separately know these concepts and their definitions. So the fundamental attribution error is the strong tendency to overestimate dispositional factors and underestimate situational factors when you make attributions about other people's behaviors. So what am I talking about? Okay, so there's 3 nested ideas here. There's the correspondence bias, which is just this. You tend to make correspondent attributions of other people's behaviors. You tend to make dispositional ones. The fundamental attribution error goes a step further and says, well, yeah, that's the case. And what's more, you really underestimate the role of the situation. Don't make enough situational attributions when you make judgments about other people's behavior. And that leads you, and that's an error. That leads you to make erroneous attributions. So it's kind of a step further, sort of. It says not only do you make corresponding attributions, but you erroneously are underweighting the situation. Then the actor-observer bias says, yeah, all that's the case, and then what's more, you don't do it for yourself. You tend to take account of the situation for yourself and make situational attributions for yourself. So they're sort of nested ideas. It's a little bit complicated, but I wanted to be honest with you. I want to be straight with you. These ideas are central to social psychology. If I didn't teach them, I would be remiss, even though they're heavily overlapping, and then that is confusing. I suggest flashcards. Yes, ma'am. How much is each section worth? This is important because you want to skip studying one of these sections, and you want to know which one is worth the least. You know, like which one this weekend do I ignore when I'm running out of time? Because I don't know exactly. It's a legit question. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I think the long answer is like 30 to 40%, somewhere in there. That's the one you probably want to know the most about, right? Yeah, 30 to 40%, something like that. Yes, ma'am. The Sharif experiment, is that the robber's cave or is that the point of light? It is the point of light. Ignore the robber's cave. That'll come up later in the semester. Excellent question. It's the point of light, the autokinetic effect, informational influence, stuff like that. Yes, ma'am? Yeah, okay, so yes, for the readings that have names and dates, you need to be able to identify it off just the names and dates. So those three, you need to be able to know Jones and Harris 67, but what is not your question? What? Right. Okay, so for the ones below all readings, they'll be identified roughly, pretty much the way they are identified here. I try to stick to this sheet as much as possible and not pulling tricks like identify knowing people as Lavalia 99 or something like that. Yeah. That would be very tricky. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Depends on what that simpler definition is. What? Yes, that would be fine. Yeah, that would be fine. That would be a rephrasing of this. I'd be happy with that. It would be good if you somehow communicated that it was also an error, as in underestimate. Underestimate connotes that you're not doing it enough. So that would be good as well. Yeah. But yeah, that would be fine. There's a question. Yes, sir. Yes, the Jones and Harris Castro essay study, also from this lecture. In this, participants were given an anti or a pro-Castro essay that an earlier participant in the study had supposedly written, and they were asked to assess what do you think the writer's attitude was, their true attitude towards Castro. So if you're a participant in the study, you walk in, you're given an essay that's either highly supportive of Castro or highly critical of Castro. It's the 60s. This is a very, contentious topic. And you're asked, what did that writer really think about Castro? And you're also told, and this is critical, that the person was randomly assigned either to write an anti or a pro-Castro essay, or else they wouldn't get credit for participating in the experiment. So they didn't have choice in what they wrote about. But what we find in the experiment is that people still tend to make correspondent attributions. People tend to still make dispositional attributions. They tend to assume that the person's behavior, having wrote this essay, corresponds with their actual disposition, their real thoughts and feelings. So they conclude if you write a pro-Castro essay, you must be supportive of Castro, even if you were assigned to. Yes, ma'am. Yes, that is an example of correspondence bias and the fundamental attribution error. And if you were to somehow not make the mistake for yourself, like if you were randomly assigned to write an essay about Castro, and then you didn't, and then you didn't change your own perception of your own attitude towards Castro, then it would be an example of of the actor-observer bias, because you'd be making these correspondent attributions to other people, but not to yourself. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes, normative and informational influence. Can I talk a little bit more about that? Yes, I can. So normative and informational influence, this is really one of the most critical distinctions to get here, and I'm like winking and nudging at you as I say that you really want to get this because it's real important. Okay. So, normative influence is conformity to the views or expectations of others in pursuit of social approval or avoidance of disapproval or embarrassment or sanctioning. It's when you conform because of social concerns, because you don't want to look like an idiot, or you want to look good or be accepted in the group or whatever. Informational influence is the use of other people's behaviors or attitudes as information or evidence about reality, so that you can get it right, so that you can perceive the world accurately. And there are experiments from this lecture that correspond very well with these two definitions. So what is the experiment that corresponds best with normative influence? Ash, exactly. The Ash experiment. So the Ash experiment, in the Ash experiment, people conform even though they're confronted with stimulus that is opposed to what, they know the right answer, but they go along with the right answer, or they go along with the wrong answer, which they should know to be wrong, because they've got 8 people staring at them and kind of intimidating them. And they say, if I don't say the right answer, or if I don't say the wrong answer, then I'm going to face social disapproval, embarrassment, sanctioning, whatever. So the Ash experiment is a good example of normative influence. They don't conform because they really believe that they got the question wrong, even though some of them reported that. We don't believe that that's the case. They go along to avoid social disapproval or pursue social approval. What is the classic example of informational influence? Sharif. In the Sharif experiment, you have no damn idea how much the red light moved, or the red dot. You don't know, because the autokinetic effect, it's ambiguous to you. You rely on everybody else's views in order to try and get the right answer. Other questions? Yes, ma'am. What are the basic principles of balance theory? I mean, here, this is pretty much like the whole balance theory lecture, kind of. So the principles of balance theory are that, there's three basic elements in a cognitive system, P, O, and X, and P seeks balance among the elements in this cognitive system, and then the principles of balance theory are also, how does that work? Roughly, how do you do that? And the idea is, if you're in an unbalanced situation, well, here's a balanced situation, and how do you know it's a balanced situation? Because if you multiply the signs around, it'll equal a positive, okay? You and your date both like the same movie, that's balanced, that's great, no problems here. But if you like a movie and you like your date, but your date doesn't like the movie, that's imbalanced. And imbalanced situations tend to move towards balance, and we tend to flip the cognition that's like most flippable, So, or the aspect of the situation that's most flippable. So you might start disliking your date, or you might try to convince your date to like the movie that you watched, or change your attitude towards the movie. And if you can somehow get it to where all the signs multiplied around equal a positive, then it'll be balanced again. So that's the basic principles of balance theory. Yes, ma'am? Yeah. What prompt are you referring to? Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. You would talk about balance theory there. No, for this question, so the question is for the long answer. I mean, this is roughly how I take your question. Should you be talking about balance theory or cognitive dissonance theory? Talk about balance theory. Don't talk about cognitive dissonance theory. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Is it okay for number one to just draw the triangles and stuff? You can draw. Can I speak in triangles? Yeah. You just blew my mind. Seriously. Yeah. That's okay, but you need to still give all. If we took out the triangles, we'd still need a full answer, if that makes sense. The triangles can support your answer and help clarify that you got it right and all that. But I need you to, in natural language, explain the answer. It's a good question, though. I think it would be nice if you did throw in the triangles. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry. That's supposed to say, right. Okay, so for number two, for the examples, where the heck do you want these examples to come from? You asked a politer version of that question. Yeah. So note below, it says note examples can come from your life, a movie, the Cialdini book, in class, a study from lecture, etc. That should have been in both places. So, aha, somebody got me. You got me. All right. I meant to put a clarifying note about that. This is amazing. I made one mistake so far. We'll see how that goes. There'll probably be more. So yes, for number two, as you give examples, for the study sheet, for the purpose of the test, if I ask essay question number two, I'll be sure to put a note saying where these examples can come from, and that note will be the same note that's on long answer question number three. Does this make sense? Okay, cool. So just imagine that's in both places. Excellent question. Did you have a? It's like an auction, kind of. Some people are like, and I'm like calling on them, and they don't want to be called on, and they're like. Yes, ma'am. Oh, we can talk about social cognition. Definitely. Let's talk about social cognition. All of us. Just me. Okay, just me. I'll just talk about social cognition. Social cognition is in the attributions lecture as well, I think, right? That turned out to be a very important lecture. It's here. Okay, I think it's here. Let's see. Aha. Social cognition is the study of the ways in which we process, store, and remember information about people. That's social cognition. And we think that, yeah, I know. That's pretty simple. And we think that, well, when social psychologists study exceptions to rationality, when they study cognitive biases, they often what they call it is the study of social cognition. And it's true that that's great. You don't like my answer. Nonetheless, though, it is the case. More questions. We have a couple minutes. Or I think we do. Yeah, we have like 2 minutes. Yes, sir. I did talk about the things we were supposed to look for in the film. Look for obedience and disobedience, conformity and nonconformity. Write down examples of those things. That would be a good way to get the most out of the film. Okay. All right, there's ruffling. You can't be controlled. Responsibility is diffused. You're out of here. Okay, I'll see you on Tuesday. Study hard for the exam. You should all make A's. There's no reason you can't.